Hello, everyone. My name is, and welcome to the Information and Computing Systems Policies Documentation. My name is Alonzo Jennings III, and we'll start the presentation right about now. All right, next slide. Hello?
Hi, everybody. This is Elliot Harmon. Here's. Okay. Here, I thought I was sharing my screen, but I wasn't.
All right, no problem. Today we're using a system, one of our donating partners, called GoToWebinar. And if you lose internet connection, reconnect it to us using that link that was emailed to you previously. That'd be the best way to get back in. If you need help or have questions, please type into the chat questions or chat box. You see that on your right-hand side. If you see the presentation, I have an example of one there. At the bottom it says questions. You can type your questions in there. Also, you can adjust your audio settings. There are two types of audio modes. One is called use telephone and also use mic and speakers. You choose which one you want to use. However, if you use mic and speakers, that is your computer's microphone and headset, or computer and microphone, however you can plug in a headset. That's the best way that I prefer to use. But however, if you want to ensure you have strong audio, you can also use your telephone, which requires you to dial a number and then put in an access code that is uniquely yours. You do that. Also, want you to know that everyone in the beginning is muted. Everyone will be muted. If you have questions, again, you'll see in the chat box below. And Kyla Hunt, she's the co-producer on this. She typed in a little message. Go ahead, type your questions in here. And that's the way you can interact with us. All right. Next slide, please. All right. Again, my name is Alonzo Jennings III. I'm the facilitator for this webinar. You will have presenters, which would be Elliot Harmon and Mary Duff. You want to introduce yourself, Elliot?
Sure. Hi, this is Elliot, and I'm really excited to be here, and we'll get started talking in just a second.
Awesome. Also, Mary Duff, she is another presenter, and she was on the last one. She presented last time. This is the second session. And Mary, you want to have anything to say to the people really quick?
Well, just welcome everybody. Great to have all of you on the call today, and we'll look forward to your questions and ideas about this presentation. So thank you for joining us.
Now, also behind the scenes, you'll see Kyla Hunt. You'll probably be very familiar with her if you see her typing in the chat, and she's going to probably interact with you a little bit more. And also Ariel Gilbert-Knight, she's on the call as well. All right. Now, we will be recording this webinar, so I tell you that just for you to know that you can also access this in the future. So we'll provide that information at the end of the webinar, where you can access the archived webinar if you like. At the end of this webinar, immediately following, you will be, just stay seated, don't do much, but you'll be entered into a tech talk, which will have a Q&A session designed to kind of reconnect and get familiar with some of the terms and ask personal questions that you need to be answered in the tech talk. Again, don't do much, just sit there and stay put. After the webinar ends, it immediately follows. It will just be, you will shift right into the tech talk. I also want to be clear, let you know that after 30 minutes of tech talk, your questions will be answered, and it is happening right here in this webinar. So don't move, stay put if you'd like to have your personal questions answered. Okay. All right. With that being said, I'm going to hand off to Elliot, and Elliot will take over, and he will walk the webinar. If you have any questions, again, use the chat box to type in your questions, and they'll be answered either by interrupting Elliot and or at the end of the webinar when we're all done. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks a lot, Alonzo, and thank you to everybody for being here. Tech planning is a topic that I'm always really excited to talk about, and I'm really excited to talk with this group of organizations. The title of this is Information and Computing Systems, Policies, and Documentation. We're going to be talking about, at a high level, about documenting your tech infrastructure and then looking at what's working well and what's working poorly in the tech infrastructure and how you can start to prioritize and budget for changes, ultimately leading to the development of a more thorough technology plan. This is a huge topic that, of course, we could talk about all day. So we are going to go through this relatively quickly. That said, there are a lot of additional materials that I'd like to direct you to. And also, Alonzo mentioned this too, but I wanted to underscore it, that we have a full 30 minutes scheduled for questions at the end of the hour. So please don't be shy getting your questions into the chat box. I want that time to be as useful to all of you as it can possibly be. Oh yeah, talking very quickly about the Technology Capacity Project by Blue Shield. The project is designed to bring Blue Shield Against Violence grantees to a baseline level of technology capacity, explore and broaden the field's IT knowledge, and explore solutions for technology support services for the entire sector. And if you have any questions at all, definitely contact Mary Duffy, who is on this call, and we'll be talking a little bit later during the tech talk. There's her information. I will make sure that I get my information out to all of you as well, as I'm definitely happy to continue up any follow-up questions or any kind of conversation you're interested in having with me. Oh yeah, and there's the third of this series is the Introduction to Security Basics and Fundamentals, which is going to be offered December 14 and January 18. And like this session, that'll be roughly the same session presented twice, so you're only required to attend one of those. And I assume if you have any questions about that, you should direct those to Mary. I believe that by this point you all have received the workbook in the mail, which outlines the steps of creating your technology strategy. This webinar is going to very closely follow the outline of that workbook, so you're welcome to follow along in it if you like. I'll be talking specifically about a few of the worksheets in there, but there's also a lot of material in there that we won't have time to cover in this webinar. The basic steps for developing a technology strategy, as they are outlined in that workbook, are understand where you are. Step 2, understand where you want to be, or what's working well and what's working poorly. Step 3, identify and prioritize technology solutions for addressing those problems. Step 4, lay out a plan for funding and implementing technology changes. And finally, step 5, write up your technology strategy. And again, in the worksheets that you've already been provided, you have a pretty excellent framework leading you through these steps. And worksheets that are already ready to use for your tech inventory and strategy. So I would urge that you look closely at those. But anyway, so the technology strategy. Let's talk a little bit about why you need a technology strategy. The first and really the most important reason why you need a technology strategy at your organization is to align technology choices to programmatic goals. This is a pretty important concept that you're going to hear me come back to several times throughout the course of the webinar. This is about the technology serving the nonprofit's mission and the nonprofit's goals in a very literal way. We'll get to this a little bit later when we actually talk about writing the technology strategy. But one thing I really like from the workbook is that it shows that there should be a very explicit connection between your organizational strategy and how technology plays a role in that. You should be able to very specifically go through your organization's programmatic objectives and say, okay, this is how the technology infrastructure is supporting this. And if that sounds scary or that sounds too techy, then I would encourage you to sort of take a deep breath and relax. The reality is that that kind of alignment does not necessarily imply having a super techy, geeky kind of organization. The same principles that we're talking about here are just as relevant if you have 500 computers in your organization or if you just have one. A good friend of mine, Steve High, works for the YMCA of Chicago, and I really like this quote of his. He said, IT needs to stop being the ones asking for new money. If you have stronger relationships with the rest of your organization and can help them develop the business case, they can ask for the money for the project. Notice I said ask for money for the project, not for the tech. It's just different when someone else asks to fund a project rather than IT asking for more technology. Let the rest of your org become the champions of technology. I think that's a really powerful statement, and again, this is possible even if you're not in a super geeky, super techy sort of organization. That kind of alignment is possible, and again, being able to point to how technology choices directly support the programmatic objectives of the organization. I think that sometimes in the nonprofit sector we have a way of thinking about IT sort of the same way you might think of the custodians, nothing against custodians, but that IT is sort of who you call when something breaks, and that they don't really have a table, they don't really have a place in the table in the programmatic decisions and the priorities of the organization. And as much as possible, I think it behooves us all to move away from thinking of tech that way toward thinking of how tech can make a big difference in our organizations and in the communities that we serve. Articulate technology needs to donors and funders. I kind of touched on that a second ago with that quote that I just showed you from Steve. But this is, once again, it's about being able to point to a budget item in the technology budget and explain exactly how this supports the bottom line of the organization's mission. And that's about articulating those needs to donors and funders. It can also sometimes be about articulating those needs to the board or to people within the organization. Finally, actually not finally, there's one more after this one, proactive technology decisions. I said a second ago that some people think of IT as kind of who you call when something breaks. Instead, we should try to move toward thinking of not just fixing things when they break, but making something better. Here's a pyramid that I didn't come up with this. This was created by Ed Granger Happ, but I've used this several times. This pyramid of nonprofit technology, in which you could kind of dissect more layers of this, but generally the bottom half of the pyramid is infrastructure supporting tech, i.e. keeping the lights on, fixing things when they break. And the top half of the pyramid is mission supporting tech, technology really making a difference in the community in a proactive sort of way. Here's the rub though. Of course, you never actually graduate from the bottom half of the pyramid, right? These needs never go away, which is why all of this really requires having a strong technology strategy and being able articulate the need for both budget for technology and staff time for technology. Otherwise, you'll never get beyond that deluge of help desk requests toward actually building something that might be less error prone. The last reason why you need a technology strategy is to be prepared for natural and man-made disasters. Disaster planning and disaster recovery are topics that we are pretty passionate about here at TechSoup. A couple of years ago, we put together a guide to disaster planning and recovery for nonprofits and public libraries. And if you follow the URL here, you can actually download and read that guide, and I would encourage you to do it. one of the people that we talked to while we were putting together this guide was Susan at the Eagle's Nest Foundation. And they're an interesting organization that's doing a lot of work out in the field, out in the wilderness, in places where there's not necessarily reliable electricity, let alone internet access. And she spoke really succinctly about the need for a strong tech strategy. It's better to waste the time backing up than to dread the effects of a disaster that could happen any time. Redundancy in communications options is very important, as is having off-site resources for communication when your systems are down. What I really like about this quote is that the things that she's talking about here, having a backup in place, having a good communications options, having off-site backup, these are actually just good tech planning. These aren't really explicitly about disaster planning. But having said that, they're also the steps that you can take that will make you most prepared for a disaster. And I think that this is extremely important in the nonprofit community. I think that everybody on this call recognizes that disasters, be they natural disasters or man-made disasters, are the times when our communities need nonprofits the most. Those are the times when your services are the most badly in need. And if we can do the work ahead of time so that in those crucial hours and days after a disaster strikes, we can as soon as possible be back up working to rebuild the community and not spending those hours and days trying to find our computer license information in old emails or something. The more we can be prepared, the better job we will do at serving our communities. So those are kind of some reasons why it behooves you to have a strong technology strategy. But now I actually want to take a step back and hear from you. We have a couple of surveys to get a little bit more sense of who all is on the call. Could you bring up the first one of those, Alonzo? Okay, the first question is, what is your role? And we'll give you about 45 seconds to answer this. Leadership/ED, IT staff, other staff, or a board member or volunteer. Now I recognize there might be a little bit of confusion about whether a lot of people are IT staff or other staff, and a little bit later we'll get into the concept of the accidental techie. But I would say, you know, you are, for these purposes, you are IT staff if tech comprises 50% or more of your job. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, has everybody gotten their votes into here? Okay, can we see the results of that? Could you close the poll, Alonzo? Okay, good. So we have a pretty close three-way split between leadership people and IT staff and other staff. And we have a few board members and volunteers. Okay, that's good to know. And again, we'll talk some more about sort of the importance of the accidental techie and starting to give a little bit more structure to some of those informal tech roles. Okay, can we go into the second question? Who manages technology at your organization? In this poll, you're actually allowed to check more than one thing. Dedicated IT staff, I think you all were basically on the same page about that concept. Accidental techie, again, for these purposes, let's just define that as people who the bulk of their job is doing something else besides technology. Outsourced, and that could include consultants, volunteers. Oh, actually not volunteers, because number 4 is volunteer. Okay, we'll give you just a few more seconds to get that in there. Okay, looks like 85% of you have voted. Okay, this is very interesting. So it's very telling to all these issues we were just talking about technology alignment, that only about a third of the people on this call have dedicated IT staff at all. Having said that, clearly there is some crossover. There's obviously people who checked more than one thing, so organizations that have a combination of accidental techies and consultants that work with them, or a combination of accidental techies and dedicated IT staff. And very few of you identified volunteers as the primary people managing technology at your organization, which is encouraging, although volunteers certainly do play an important role. Okay, that's great. And with that, we can move on to the actual technology strategy process. And again, this very, very closely follows the outline of the workbooks that you've received. So you're welcome to follow along in them right now if you like, or you can refer to them later, of course. Step one is simply understanding where you are, or as people sometimes call it, the documentation or technology assessment phase. This is where you're assessing your technology infrastructure. And there are lots of fancy tools out there, both installed and online, for keeping track of your technology infrastructure, keeping track of your computers, keeping in track of all your software licenses, how many software licenses you're using. And some of those tools also have help desk functions and other sorts of functionality. We have an article about that, and you can follow the short link there if you'd like to read some more about those. You'll find I personally, in this and in many other things, even though I work a lot in technology, I'm kind of a Luddite. And I'm kind of the opinion that particularly for a smaller organization, all you really need is a notebook or a Word document in order to take a pretty good assessment of your infrastructure. I certainly don't think that tools are the answer to everything, although they certainly are important. In your workbook, you have a pretty good set of worksheets for conducting that technology assessment. I'm not going to show you all of those, but I wanted to comment on a couple of them quickly. Number one is desktop hardware and printer inventory, and you see there's a row there for each computer in your office or outside of your office, and columns for whose computer it is, what the location is, what the make and model is, what operating system is loaded on it, what software. You actually can't see it in the worksheet here, but there's also a worksheet for whether those computers are under warranty, what kind of information you need for accessing tech support, et cetera, for those. So all of that is information that you have somewhere probably, but getting it in one place is doing a fantastic favor for yourself. Worksheet 2, very similar, is your software license inventory. And there's columns there for software, number of licenses, and of course number of copies installed. In the process of taking an assessment like this, you may find out that you have a lot of software licenses that you're not using. On the other hand, you might also find out that you're using a lot of software licenses that you don't have. Anyway, these are things that you can figure out as you are taking this assessment. And there's also the product keys and the location of the actual physical CD. A thing that I sort of want to underscore here, I mentioned this a second ago with the hardware inventory, but I want to mention it again, is that a lot of the things that you're going to put together in taking this inventory are already things that you have somewhere. Maybe that somewhere is in an old binder somewhere. Maybe it's in your emailed receipts from TechSoup or from Amazon or from Best Buy. Maybe you have a volunteer or somebody who manages your TechSoup account for you, so they have some of that information. So you probably have all of this information spread in a lot of different places. But taking the work of getting it all into a set of documentation like this will be hugely useful for the later stages of the technology planning process. And also, knock on wood, in case of any sort of disaster striking your community, you will thank yourself later for having all of this information at your fingertips. The reason why I put this cute little robot person here is to remind us that people are also a part of your technology infrastructure. And in the worksheets, there are these sections for staff skills and training needs. If I remember correctly, a little over a third of you identified yourselves as the accidental techies in your organizations, and a number of the rest of you are the people possibly managing those accidental techies. As much as you can kind of take those informal technology roles that people play within the organization and start to document those, get those on the list of who is the point person for managing SharePoint or managing email or for supporting the desktops, as much as you can get that information on paper and recognized as a part of a person's role, that's good for those people in terms of their professional development. It's also good for the organization because you can start to say, oh, you know, the person who just by default manages our CRM doesn't have training in managing CRM, and although she's doing her best, there's a lot of things that she's just not able to do. So let's talk about training and support opportunities there. Certainly those will need to be prioritized like everything else, but it's great to have them be part of the discussion. Speaking of the accidental techie, Mark Shaw wrote this pretty inspiring little essay about what he calls the purposeful techie, which is somebody who doesn't necessarily have any formal IT background and might have another full-time job at the organization, but is recognized as a stakeholder and a decision maker in technology and has a place at the table, so to speak. And I love this quote from that essay. A major issue the accidental techie has with her responsibilities, however informal they may be, is that they conflict with her core job function. Not everyone is a natural-born multitasker, but the purposeful techie puts in place parameters that allow her to balance competing needs. It's basic, but scheduling time in her calendar for maintenance and individual computer user assistance at appropriate intervals in the day, week, or month will bring order to the support role and create boundaries. So those of you who a minute ago identified yourselves as accidental techies or identified accidental techies as the primary people managing technology at your organization, I would encourage you to think about whether those boundaries are in place and that if not, to try to create and deepen those boundaries, and ultimately you'll be helping the impact of those people in both roles that they play in the organization. The last thing I'd like to say about the assessment phase is don't panic, parentheses, yet, close parentheses. In the process of doing this documentation, of doing your technology assessment, there's a good chance that you'll uncover some messes. Perhaps you will realize that one or more computers in your organization are not backed up at all. Maybe you have a backup server, but that maybe some of the computers are Macs and those aren't compatible with it. Maybe you will find out that some of the people in your organization are not able to use their official organizational email addresses because they don't have the correct software installed on their computer or some sort of compatibility issue. So they're using their Yahoo and Hotmail email addresses to handle everything, so the organization doesn't have visibility into those. These are the kind of messes that you'll uncover, and there's the temptation to panic, but the importance is to really document the infrastructure as it is, warts and all, in this assessment phase. Which brings us to step 2, understand where you want to be. So this is where you get to start panicking. In the process of looking at how your organization is working and where problem areas might be, there are sort of 3 key questions that I keep coming back to. What is working well, what is working but could be working better, and what is not working, what's broken. As you are conducting this assessment, particularly if it's the first time that you've done one or if it's the first time that you've done one in a long time, you will probably want to have conversations with nearly everybody in the organization, or at least everybody that works with technology. That could also include volunteers. That could also include clients in some cases. In the course of those discussions with the people around your organization, a kind of rubric that I like using is don't start with a solution, start with a problem, or identify the problem before you try to start looking for a solution. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's say that in the course of taking this assessment, you go to your fundraising manager and you ask him, okay, what's working well, what's working poorly with your job? How could your job work better? And let's say that he says, well, right now, our list of donors is just in an Excel spreadsheet on my computer. So it's very difficult to see when a donor has been communicated with last, or to see when they've last sent in a donation. It's hard for me to stratify them and categorize them by region, or by how often they donate, or by how high volume of donors there are. What if we got Salesforce? Salesforce, if you're not familiar with it, is what they call a CRM, or a constituent relationship management tool. It's based on the internet, which is why their logo is this anti-software thing. But anyway, let's say that your fundraising manager says we need Salesforce. And you say, okay, that's fine, and you write Salesforce on your shopping list. And then you go and talk to your volunteer manager, and she says, well, you see, I have all of our volunteer profiles in this paper binder. So it's very difficult to see when somebody has communicated with them last, and it's hard for me to keep track of who I should call next about whatever volunteering project, or to sort them by interests. What if we got GiftWorks? GiftWorks, if you're not familiar with it, that is a donor management tool, but that also has rather robust volunteer management features in it. And you say, okay, that sounds wonderful. That's available at TechSoup. I'll add GiftWorks to my shopping list. What happened here, though? In talking to both of these managers, they gave you solutions, but in adopting both of those solutions, did you actually miss the underlying problem? That there are a lot of people who are on both of those lists. And when a volunteer manager went to call somebody in her list, she had no idea whether that person had recently sent in a donation, not been thanked for it yet, or whether the fundraising manager had just been bothering that person. In starting from the solution instead of starting from the problem, you might have actually missed an opportunity to use technology to deepen your nonprofit's impact. This is a great line from the workbook that I like a lot. Don't think, what do we want to buy? Think, what do we want to do with technology? Think again about the pyramid that I showed you earlier, and about really tying your technology plan to the strategic goals of the organization. This is your opportunity to think big about how your organization could be more effective in the community, and what tools or what strategies you could adopt to help you along that path. The result of this is going to be more complicated, but ultimately more impactful than a simple shopping list. Excuse me. I'm sorry, just a second. Step 3, identify and prioritize technology solutions. So you've documented the tech infrastructure at your organization. You've interviewed people around the organization. You've looked at what's working well, what's not working well. Now it's the time to go out there and see, okay, what can we implement that'll improve how our organization works? Here's a list of questions that the workbook suggests, and I think that these questions are an excellent place to start. How secure is your technology setup? Are there any gaps that should be addressed? And of course, this is good timing because you all have a webinar about security coming up in a week or two. Are there better data storage and collaboration solutions available? So we talked a minute ago about the client databases, and if there's ways that you could use a client database to work in a more holistic way with your community. Will upgrading to more recent hardware or software help? And sometimes the answer to that question is no, but sometimes it's yes. Is there a tool out there that will fill a gap in your tool set? And again, to come back to that training and support issue, would it help if your staff were trained or retrained in how to use your technology? So this is something that I always like suggesting. Don't start with the unlimited budget scenario and build down from it. Instead, start with the simplest, cleanest solution and build up from it. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Here, I'm changing my pen color because I didn't like drawing in gray. Let's say that you are putting together a sort of ideal technology infrastructure. Here we have our System Center Operations Manager up here. We have our CMS. We have our backup server. We have our CRM. We have VPN, firewall. We have these computers. The ED's phones sync with their laptops because that's awesome. And you have this pretty sophisticated technology infrastructure. Here's what might happen, though, after you put together a diagram like this. The realities of budget, of compatibility issues, of staff time might start to set in. And suddenly you start crossing things off of that diagram. Actually, we can't afford Operations Manager, even though that's available at TechSoup. It's going to be too expensive to support it. And there's some questions about the privacy with the VPN, so we're going to cut that out. A couple of the staff work remotely, so they're not able to connect to the backup server. And, oh no, our designer over here insists on using a Mac, and that's not compatible with the backup server. And suddenly what you have is kind of a shell of your previous tech infrastructure. What you have is kind of a mess. I would suggest start from the simplest solution to whatever the problem is at hand, and then see if you can build on that. To come back to the discussion we were having a bit ago about the CRM databases, let's say that you have here your fundraising manager, your volunteer manager, your grants and development manager, and your client management. And all of these people have their separate lists of users, but there are many user records that cross over between these. Let's say, okay, let's get all of these departments using one CRM. I put Zoho there. That's a cloud-based CRM that's one of the several definitely worth looking at. I didn't put that out of any prejudice against the others. I just used that because I had the logo handy. You can follow this link for an article about more cloud-based CRMs. But the point is that now here you have this extremely simple solution to the problems that you were looking at. So it's a way of kind of building up from the ground as opposed to thinking, to creating some massive solution and then chopping things off of that. Step 4. Lay out a plan for funding and implementing technology changes. So here you've already documented where your organization is. You've already thought about what the problems are, what could be working better. You've started to identify and prioritize those technology solutions. Now it's time to really schedule how you're going to enact those and how you're going to pay for it. I like this bit from the workbook a lot. It's a reminder to include all costs associated with implementation. And the workbook actually mentions this 30-70 rule, which means that in an average organization, about 30% of the IT budget should be going to the actual sticker price of pieces of software and hardware. And the rest are going to staff time, they're going to support, they're going to maintenance. And that number is going to vary a little bit from organization to organization, but what this really is an important reminder that your IT budget is much more than the cost of software and hardware. So when you're thinking about your IT budget, think holistically. Oh, there we go. And don't forget in the course of putting this together that time is a budget item. And that includes not only the time of your IT staff or of consultants or whoever is going to be training the staff in using new tools, but it's also including the time of the other staff too, of being trained, of the time adopting and adjusting to those new tools. These are all part of your budget for any substantial technology change. In the workbook, you also have this set of worksheets for budget, and I like this chart of budget items because it shows how holistically you need to think about a technology budget. There's training in there, there's staffing in there, there's support contracts, etc. Which brings me to the discussion of the total cost of ownership, or TCO as it's sometimes called. Means all of the cost, both in terms of time and in terms of money, of adopting any technology solution. And there are many components that go into TCO. There's staff support, there's vendor fees, there's training, there's bandwidth and hardware costs, there's infrastructure costs. We actually did a whole article about the total cost of ownership, so you're welcome to follow that link there if you're curious to read more about this. But the point again is to not just look at the sticker price, but to look at the entire impact on your organization in terms of cost. Having said that, TCO is sort of a double-edged sword. Sometimes people will use TCO to defend the more expensive solution. You hear this a lot in debates about free and open source software, for example. Somebody might say, well, yes, this $50 product is cheaper than the $2,000 solution, but there's all of these hidden costs. That's true, of course, but there are also hidden costs of more expensive software as well. So really think logically and think holistically about the cost of adoption. I apologize. For some reason, my screen is being slow. Hopefully it won't crash or something. About implementing any kind of technology solution, I like talking about the 3 Ps. The first P is, oh, here we go. I'm going to fix that there. Oh, no, oh, no. The first P is phased schedule, which means that you're not changing too much at once. If you have it scheduled that you're going to update your email server and your CRM and the server that your website is stored on, let's just go with those 3. You're going to update all 3 of those. Don't do those all over one weekend. Have a phased schedule that's made public to the staff. And when you roll one piece out and something is not working right, or staff are having trouble using it, or there's compatibility issues, don't build on top of broken. Fix what is wrong already with the current phase before you move to the next phase of implementation. Publicize changes. This is a pretty important issue, and it's something that I think sometimes gets overlooked. You're publicizing those changes within the staff. For example, if you're moving to a new email server, you should certainly be letting the staff know of any dates that email is going to be unavailable well in advance. You should, if there's going to be training necessary, you should be letting them know well in advance when that training is going to be made available. It also sometimes includes people outside of the organization. I think that all of us in the nonprofit community have this certain blessing, and it's a blessing that we sometimes take for granted, and it's a blessing that we might even sometimes think of as a curse, but it is a blessing nonetheless, and that is that we have people outside of our organizations who care a lot about our organizations and sometimes have a sense of ownership over our organizations. Sometimes those people are volunteers, sometimes they're very evangelistic clients, sometimes they're donors, but these are people in the community who care about your organization just as much as you do, if not more. These are the kind of folks that if you're making changes that affect them, you want to talk with them about them ahead of time for a couple of reasons. One is just because it's a nice thing to do and it'll make them feel appreciated. 2 is that when suddenly there is a change that seems rather matter-of-fact to you, it won't be jarring to those folks in the community who pay the most attention to your organization. And finally, it'll give you another perspective, just like a little while ago when we were talking about interviewing people in your organization, that you also want to talk with some folks outside the organization. Similarly, talking with these kind of evangelists in your community about technology changes that you're working on that'll affect them, it'll give you a different perspective of how your technology affects the community beyond your organization. And the third P is please train the staff. And this is kind of considered a no-brainer, possibly, but it's also the thing that seems to get forgotten about the most. I gave a similar talk to this recently at a nonprofit conference, and when I came to please train the staff, a woman raised her hand and said, yes, that should be obvious, but it never happens. And I was curious, so I asked her to tell me a little bit more. And she said that she worked, and she wasn't an ED, but she was management at an organization of about 200 people. And she said that IT was frequently making all kinds of changes that impacted her a lot. And she felt like she was lucky if she was told anything, let alone training. And I was kind of surprised by that. A relatively large organization, about the same size as TechSoup. I was surprised that they really weren't offering any training at all. So I asked, there was no memos about getting training on the new system? And she said, okay, yes, there was. What they did is they downloaded a PDF from the manufacturer's website of the new server, and they emailed that around. And they had a phone number to call if you have any questions about it. And that was their training. And I said, did you read any of that? And she said, of course not, I'm busy. And I think that when you have that sort of approach to training, just kind of, well, just read the manual, you're sending the message that you weren't really thinking about how the technology would impact the organization. You're sending the message that you really just found the cheapest thing off the shelf and you didn't think very hard about how it would impact the organization's bottom line. And in the case of this woman, I think that that was what she perceived, and I think that she was absolutely right. Finally, step 5, write your technology strategy. And again, oh, there we go. And again, Ariel and Mary have done a fantastic job of putting together this workbook that you can use to put together that technology strategy. I like this template for your strategic technology plan a lot. And one thing that I really like about it, and you can see here in the screenshot I've taken here, is that it starts with the organizational goals of your nonprofit, the overview, the mission, who your organization serves, and what your organizational goals are, technology notwithstanding. And then when you move on to the technology goals, you're asked to tie the technology goals. Here, let me get a pen. You're asked to tie the technology goals directly to those goals from the strategic plan. If a goal from the strategic plan is improving services to clients by making it easier for staff to work together on client cases, then we've already talked about ways that a technology solution can directly support that goal. Similarly, if you have a goal of increasing the number of volunteers, then you have the technology goals having to do with the e-newsletter that directly support those goals. And on you go down the line. For every choice of technology implementation, you should be able to tie it right back to that strategic plan. So what happens now? You've gone through all of the phases. You've likely gotten some new software from TechSoup and from other places, and you've put together this technology strategy. What happens now is you put all of that stuff into a binder and you never look at it again because you are done with technology planning. No, that is not accurate. This leads directly back in to the first step of technology planning with suddenly this more thorough documentation that you have. I use a sort of rubric sometimes when talking about tech planning. You're welcome to use it too if you find it useful, which is DARA, which stands for Document, Auscultate, Rebuild, Align. And as you'll see here, the steps that we've just laid out follow directly in this cycle. Step 1, document, understand where you are. Step 2, auscultate. That's kind of a funny word, but that means when a doctor listens to your heart or to your lungs with a stethoscope. That's called auscultation. I like that a lot as an allegory for what we're doing when we're understanding what's not working in the nonprofit, because you're making a diagnosis, but you're doing it in a non-invasive way. You don't need to put the nonprofit under the knife, so to speak, in order to make the diagnosis. Step 3, rebuild. Identify and prioritize technology solutions. And step 4, lay out a plan for funding and implementing those technology changes, for which I've used the word align, which kind of alludes to the idea that you should be aligning it to the nonprofit's current practices. You should be rolling it out in such a way that it is not disruptive. And then finally, with step 5, writing up your technology strategy, you're back to documentation. And another thing I sort of like about this wheel is that it implies that you can be in more than one place on this wheel at once. For example, at a certain time, your security might be in the documentation phase, and your website might be in the rebuilding phase, and your CRM might be in the auscultation phase. But ultimately, you are continuing to build, to simultaneously listen to what's going on in the organization and to research and build and find solutions that better meet your nonprofit's needs and better support the community. That is all I have to say. I'm definitely hoping that some questions have come up in the past hour, so we will have something to do over the next half hour.
Alonzo, if you want to go ahead and read any of the questions now, you can go ahead and do that. I know at least one question's come in.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Elliot. That was quite the thorough presentation. I'd like to open up the floor for questions on anything that Elliot may cover. Teddy Roberts, you had a question regarding, this is for our own agency's information, correct? For us to keep track on our own technology, right? And then you said, okay, I see it. Are you 100% clear on that question, Teddy? I'm going to unmute and see. Oh, Teddy, you there? Yes, thank you. Okay, great. All is well. All right. Again, I like to have people utilize the actual chat box to answer any questions you may have or ask any questions you may have.
Alonzo, I actually had a question really quick for Elliot. Let me actually, and Elliot, if you could mute yourself so I could not have, okay, cool. I was just hearing an echo. So how long do you think that a typical staff would want to designate for, like how long they would want to designate for technology planning? Like how many months would that process take?
That's a really good question. I think that varies a lot, both on the size of the organization and on kind of the complexity of the organization's tech infrastructure. So, like, I almost don't want to say an exact amount of time. I could say ones that I've been a part of. I did this process not too long ago with a small arts organization that I'm kind of a friend of and volunteer for. And this is a very small organization. This is like 3 staff, one of whom was full-time. And simply that documentation phase alone took longer than you would think. It took 2 or 3 months. So it's certainly a long process, or it can be a long process. I don't want to scare people. But it's also it's a process where every step along the way you can be building and improving upon things. You know, one of the, here I'll go back here. You know, in step 3 you have identify and prioritize technology solutions. And, you know, I think that all of us at our nonprofits have 100 things that we'd like to get to that we just can't get to yet. But you can be making those prioritizing decisions throughout the process. Ariel or Mary, do you have anything to add to that? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a process. I think that's one of the things we really want to highlight, that this is not something that has to be done all at once. You know, first and foremost, for the purpose of this particular grant, as you know, you're going to be able to access $1,250 worth of donated product. It's really helpful to know what you have before you put in for that order, so that you don't duplicate resources that you already have and you don't get something that doesn't fit with your current organization's infrastructure. So my suggestion would be is to take this in bite-sized pieces and to start at least with the inventory worksheet that we've provided in the toolkit that will help you to get an idea and understanding of what you currently have. And you know, knowing that folks in this audience really don't have, by and large, a dedicated IT staff person, we recognize that this is something you can't drop everything else and do because you're serving clients. But what we're suggesting is to start this process, to start this journey, so that you really do start to get a stronger sense of what you need so you can better serve your clients in the future. Because looking at this can be daunting. It's like, when am I going to get time to do this? Just remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Do it in bite-sized pieces and do it in, you know, sort of the easiest pieces of it first, and then start building from there would be my suggestion. Does that make sense to folks? You can type answers. If it doesn't make sense, please let us know. Type your questions.
I think that makes sense, Mary.
Okay.
I think that was very well said, Mary.
Okay, great. Maybe I could talk. Any other questions? Did you have another question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's two questions from Shannon Forrest. She asked, when building your plan, should you break out the core services needs from the website design needs? Who can best answer that one?
Elliot, you want to start, and then I'll jump on that? Or I'm happy to take it.
Sure. Well, I think in some ways it depends how big of a team you're working with and whether it would be the same people doing both of those. In a way, it also kind of gets into questions about what the purpose of your website is. We just recently did a webinar about that, which you're welcome to watch the archive of if you want. Like if you are using your website, or if you want to be using your website to administer those services directly, like if clients are able to log into it, et cetera, then I'd say that that's certainly a need for a more thorough plan that includes your website and your services administration. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, it's helping yourself prioritize your list of needs. What is the pain point in your organization right now that you need to address? What are the things that you feel like is really stifling your organization from best serving your clients? And I would tackle those problems first and foremost. And you're the only one that really can decide that based on what your current situation is. Certainly, if you don't have a strong infrastructure in your organization, it's going to be hard to implement new technologies. So you want to make sure that your infrastructure is strong before you take on bigger challenges. But I still go back to, you know, deal with the crisis points first and foremost, get those resolved and identified, and then move on from there. That would be my suggestion on that. Does that make sense to folks? Okay.
And another question she poses is it better, put it up, excuse me, is it better to host your own web/email or outsource? Elliot?
I would, here, am I muted? Can people hear me?
You're unmuted.
I can hear you.
I would strongly encourage nobody, or very close to nobody, to host their own website. It is expensive and difficult, and there are just better ways to, let a company that is professional at hosting websites host your website for you. The question about email is a little bit more complicated. There are certainly various cloud-based email services that have gotten quite a bit of popularity over the last few years, Google Apps being probably the most famous of them. And those are certainly useful and preferable for a lot of kinds of organizations, but there is also value in having your email in-house. I'd say that one really key question in deciding that might have to do with how much of your staff is internal to the office versus how much is working from the field or working from home or whatever. Do you have anything to add to that, Mary or Ariel?
I mean, I think some of it is also what your capacity is. I mean, the email piece can be quite an interesting challenge. And so I think you have to weigh it with your particular system. If you have a dedicated IT staff, you have an Exchange server already set up or some other system in your organization, you need to first evaluate whether or not that's serving your needs well. And the management and maintenance of that is something that you can realistically maintain and deal with. If not, what I would suggest is start to look at these alternative solutions. I'm not sure that everybody is familiar with what cloud services actually mean, and if not, I would suggest that you type that question in now so we can go over that. But if you do, I mean, basically this is something that is not going to be hosted at your site, and you're going to be, all the information will be stored elsewhere. And there are some security things that you need to take into consideration that Eric will talk about next week. And there's also just some maintenance things that you'll need to consider. So we're going to answer this question like typical consultants, which is it depends. But at the same time, it depends a lot on what your capacity is, what your resources are, and what your time limitations include.
Mary, I am seeing that a couple of people
Alonso,
said.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah,
I go for it, Alonso.
we do. And yeah. They want to know what, yeah, I'm sorry. Some people out there don't know what cloud services are.
Okay.
So if you'd like to cover that, that'd be awesome.
Elliot, you want to start and I'll tag in?
Sure. It's kind of nice timing because here at TechSoup.org we just finished a month-long event having to do with cloud computing, and we can share the URL for that. We produced lots of content about how organizations are using the cloud and what interesting things organizations are doing in the cloud. And I would particularly urge you to watch a webinar that was hosted by my colleague Tierney Smith of TechSoup Canada about cloud computing for nonprofits, and we can send you the URL for that. That was all a very big wind-up to an actual answer to the question. Mary hit it right on the nail with the most basic definition of what cloud computing is. Cloud computing is any time that you are using computing power that is not in your offices or in your purview, but is stored and is going on somewhere else. And all of us use the cloud in some form or other. When you type a search into Google, your computer isn't the one going out and finding those Google results. It's one of Google's computers. So in that way, we're all using the cloud all of the time. To take a really obvious example of the difference between installed and cloud software, use what Mary referred to just a second ago, of the difference between having your Exchange server in-house handling all the email for your organization, or having Google Apps installed for your domain. I guess I've said Google Apps a couple of times. People might not know what that is. Google Apps is essentially Gmail, but instead of the email addresses being at gmail.com, it is at whatever your nonprofit is, .org. And there's various other services that come along with that. So that's a very literal difference. If you're running Exchange, then you're the one managing the email in your organization, and if something goes wrong with it, you're the one supporting it. If you're using Google Apps or another one of those cloud-based email services, then it's somebody else managing that, and your staff is simply plugging into it remotely. There are a lot of interesting things that are possible with the cloud that are more difficult with other kinds of software. One area where I find what's happening in the cloud really exciting is project management with tools like Basecamp and Huddle that allow you to kind of bring folks into a project from outside the organization, be they volunteers or allies at other organizations, and work together with them on a project who might not be people that you'd want to like give access to your VPN or give access to your Microsoft project account. So there's definitely opportunities for working with people in a more informal, lightweight kind of way that are made possible by cloud computing.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Elliot. And just so everybody knows, we're switching into our Tech Talk time. And again, that's just an additional 30 minutes of questions, or however long that we have questions coming in. So if you do have those questions coming in, put them into the questions box as you think of them, and we will try to get to all of them as we can. And again, my name is Kyla Hunt. Our producer for the webinar, Alonzo, has just handed me controls, so just in case you're wondering why the main speaker has changed, that would be why. And Alonzo, thank you so much for producing the actual webinar. It was really great, so thank you, Alonzo. I know that one additional question came in saying, let me find it. Not looking at the right screen.
I've got a few of them here.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, for some reason I'm not seeing my
Google app and Gmail.
Oh, there they are. Yeah, thank you, Alonzo. I appreciate it. Yeah, what is the difference between Google app and Gmail? So I don't know if Elliot wants to take that.
There are some other differences, but the basic difference is that you sign up for Google Apps on behalf of your entire organization. So let's say I run a nonprofit that is Elliot.org. I could sign up Elliot.org for Google Apps, and let's say all these people work for me. So there would be separate accounts for Kyla at Elliot.org and Ariel at Elliot.org and Alonzo at Elliot.org. And all of those people would be able to log into their email the same way that they would into Gmail, but I would have administrative controls over all of them. So in a way it's kind of, you can sort of think of it as sort of a hybrid between the idea of an individual webmail address like Gmail or Yahoo or whatever and an enterprise-wide email server. It's kind of a combination of the two. There are other functions of Google Apps as well that include like calendars and people being able to invite each other to meetings and reserving conference rooms, and all of those sorts of functionality are included as part of Google Apps.
Great. And actually, one of the attendees said that there was a little bit of break of sound when you first started to explain what Google Apps were. So if you could just reiterate what they were, that would be awesome.
Okay. I apologize for the break in sound. To put it most simply, the difference between Gmail and Google Apps is that you sign up your entire organization at once for Google Apps. I used the example that if I had my own nonprofit, my address were Elliot.org, then I could sign up Elliot.org for Google Apps, and I could give my employees all email addresses that were their name at Elliot.org. And I, as the administrator of that account, would have certain administrative controls over all of the email addresses in that domain. Aside from that difference, the functionality is very similar to Gmail itself.
You know, one thing I would add too is that, I mean, you then have the opportunity to do shared documents, you know, working on a document collectively with everybody in your organization, shared email, shared, you know, calendaring. It gives you a place to do those activities elsewhere other than in your organization. One of the things I've noted from some of the nonprofits I've been working with who have done this, have adopted Google Apps, is with any new system, you're going to deal with a change management issue. You know, you're doing stuff differently than the way you've done it before. So even though it's fairly low cost by comparison to managing and maintaining it all internally, you're still going to have to train folks, and you're still going to have to support folks to learn and use this new system. And it works really well if you provide it can work really well if you provide the training to folks. It will not work well at all if you just throw it out there and say, okay, it's all set up, just do it. So for any product, anything you use, cloud-based or internal, the one thing I would suggest is to make sure that you train and support folks to learn those new systems and use them effectively so they can do their jobs well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
The other thing about the cloud stuff is I just wanted to note in the guide, as we build this out, a whole chapter is going to be dedicated to cloud services and cloud resources. So that's coming up. So there'll be more written materials about that specifically related to what you folks are all dealing with at your organizations. We'll try to make it as clear and concise as possible. But just know we're always available to answer questions about that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mary.
Other questions that we had?
We do have one question from Andrew. He says that Elliot mentioned a help desk tool and was wondering if he could elaborate on that.
This is actually not something that I'm extremely knowledgeable about, so I might take a cop-out and tell you that I'll send you some more information in the future. Here, I can pull it up. I guess I can't pull it up again. I don't have control of the slides anymore. I mentioned earlier an article that we have about asset management tools, and several of those have help desk functionality as part of them. One of the ones that's mentioned in that article is called KBox, and that's actually what we use internally here at TechSoup, so we're all relatively familiar with that one. But yeah, I think aside from that, I might need to promise to get you some more information in the future, though others can definitely chime in.
No, I think that's it. There's some online solutions that, again, it's one of those things that I would do a comparison of those different products based on sort of the level of support that you need within your organization and make a decision on that. You know, it's got to be something that fits with your needs and your particular requirements. And so get clear about what those needs and requirements are before you look at some of these options, because it'll help you make the right decision.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll make sure.
I'd like to jump in
just really quick. I just wanted to say that I'll make sure that I get the additional information from Elliot, and I will send it, or I'll have Alonzo send it in the follow-up materials. And so that way, if you want more information on KBox or any of those desktop tools, that we'll try to get that to you. And again, if you have any additional questions, you can go ahead and email us, and I can put Elliot's email in the chat box again momentarily.
Great. Do we have other questions, Kyla?
I am not seeing any other questions at this moment. If anybody has any additional questions, please type them in right now.
And maybe while folks are doing that, I want to talk a little bit about the materials that we sent today so that folks can get an idea of what's included. Today we sent you a couple of PDFs, which were the Technology Capacity Guide and the Toolkit. And I just wanted to just point out a couple things that might be useful for all of you in the future as you go through this process. Now remember, the whole goal of working together on this is to help you build your technology capacity. So what we've put together is a guide, and it looks lengthy, but we've broken it up into bite-sized pieces, we think, to help you figure out, you know, some of the key issues that you might be dealing with and ways to resolve those. So if you look at page 17 in your guide, I don't know if folks have this, but this is something just if you don't, take a look at this if you could sometime in the near future. We talk about these baseline standards and goals, and this sort of ties into what Elliot was talking about earlier, that there's a belief system that there's sort of the essential components of a healthy and secure computing system, and this is what it would include. And today, if you look at the diagram on page 18, you'll see in the center of it is established strategies, policies, and documentation. So that's kind of the core to make sure you can do all of this other stuff. So that's why we focused on that today. In the next webinar, we're going to focus on the one above, which is secure network and data. So for each one of these steps that you see in this diagram, we've written out sort of key activities that we would suggest that organizations do if they want to have a healthy and secure environment. So if you look at that list, that will kind of give you an idea of what is needed. We have also, in this document, put together a toolkit so you can readily do these activities. So if you go further down in the document, around page 30, you'll see a cover sheet that says the Technology Capacity Project Toolkit. And this toolkit is really designed to give you some resources so you can readily do some of the activities that we've highlighted in that diagram. So we've got a checklist for each one of those standards. We've got an inventory, which is pretty quick and dirty. Elliot talked a little bit about this, but we've also got it for software licensing, which is really important. You need to know where the software is, what the license is, what the product keys are. You know what it's like when you can't find this stuff. So filling this out will help everybody in your organization when you get to a point that you need to find software or find key numbers for those software products. And then we've highlighted some other things that we think are pretty important. Your internet connection inventory, you know, how do the computers talk to each other? And you outline that in this particular document. Your internet service provider, what happens if your internet connection goes down? Who do you call? This will help you figure that out. And then your website information as well, because it looked like 100% of organizations, DV organizations, grantees, had a website. So you certainly want to have this information available and on hand. And then finally, who are you going to call when you need some help? You know, who are your tech support contacts, and what's their information so you can get a hold of them. Some of these other things are really checklists for future stuff. If you have staff skill inventory, you know, this is so you can figure out what kind of training you may want to do with folks. And then finally, the policy checklist. And this went back to the things that Elliot was talking about earlier. These are the policies and procedures that you want to have in place. It sounded like from our last survey that folks had these in place. So you may want to make sure you've documented it when it was last updated, because things change all the time. Where is it hiding? And who keeps it? And who changes it? It's an important thing to pay attention to. And then finally, the budget. You want to make sure you've got that budget in place. And this will be helpful before you go ahead and make decisions about ordering through TechSoup, that you really identify sort of what you have in terms of your overall budget and how this donation can fit into your overall IT budget. So I hope that helps a little bit, and the strategic planning template that Elliot talked about earlier. Finally, on the last page, we've got some frequently asked questions. This is, again, about information about TechSoup and getting ready to be able to order your product. We've included some links to help you be able to do that. So I just wanted to point that out, just in case people were, you know, trying to figure out, why do I have this guide and what's this all about? And we gave it to you in two versions, one in the long form, which is the guide and the toolkit, and one for those who just don't want to read anything and just want to get busy. You got the toolkit, and you can use that for your assessment and evaluation of your systems. So I hope that helps a little bit. And feel free to write me or call me if you have questions about the guide. I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mary.
Kyla, do we have anything else?
We do have one additional question. And this is, when we order something and it does not work out, for instance, if it's not compatible with our system, then what? What if we get the wrong thing? And that question's from Teddy.
Oh, that's a great question, and I think that's why we're really investing this time and energy in this project, is that one of the reasons that happens is people don't know what they have. So they'll order something and it'll be like, well, it's for a Mac and we have no Macintosh. Or, you know, this is too powerful a software program for the current systems that we have. So I would say the best preventative measure for that is to make sure that you go through this inventory for your organization and then identify what you have. If you have questions before your order, you should definitely get in touch with us, because what we want to do is avoid that problem, and there are ways to make sure that that doesn't happen in advance, and that's knowing what you have, knowing what you need, and knowing that it will work with the things that you currently have in your organization. So I would suggest in this case, if you have any questions about that stuff, that you contact me or Ricky, who was at the last webinar. She can help you answer some of those questions as well. But in these situations, contact us beforehand.
Okay, great. Thank you. And again, everybody, I'm not seeing any other questions that are coming in right now. Again, everybody, if you want to type in a question, you can type that into the questions box, and we will try to get to that. Mary, it's up to you when we close this out.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up and see if there are any other questions that I'll wrap up with this. Next week, next Wednesday, we've got the security webinar. That'll be the third of the first round of the series, right? So we had one last week, you had one or 2 weeks ago. We had one this week, and we'll have one next week. And at that point, that'll be the end of the series. If you've gone through all 3 of those, that sort of kicks off your eligibility to look at the product, identify what you need, and start to put in for those items. So we'll go through at this last webinar sort of the next steps around that. But I just wanted to call out, if you can at all possible make that webinar, that will basically set you up for being able to move forward with the product donations. I again would suggest, before you do that though, make sure you know what you've got.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Anything else from folks?
I'm not seeing any other questions coming in.
This has been fantastic. Nothing else? Okay. Well, I just want to thank Elliot and Alonzo, Kyla, and Ariel, who was in the background, who actually did a lot of the writing of this guide, for helping put this together. We hope that this has been useful for everybody, that you've gotten some takeaways that will help you. There will be an evaluation. We really would love to get your feedback. We're going to be doing this webinar again, and we'd like to know, what works, what doesn't, so we can make sure that we address those things in the future. Feel free to contact us. This isn't the only time that you can hear from us or talk with us, so please, by all means, take advantage of the services and resources here. We'd love to be able to help. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, everybody.
Kyla?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Elliot, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you, Alonzo. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ariel. And thank you all for attending
and
today.
Thanks to all of you.
Really great. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for your work.
So everybody have a wonderful day. We'll go ahead and end the webinar.